Okay, thanks for coming to Discourse, where I get to talk and you don't. Not my favorite mode, but useful. Because it puts you in a different mind frame. If you know you can't ask questions, if you know we're not going to interact verbally, then you listen a little bit different. And you may notice, if you've attended other discourses, that it's a little different than my usual talking, because it's a different mode for you to listen. It's also a different mode for me to express. So it has a usefulness. And for the hearing impaired, turn your volume up. So living in truth, day in and day out, is the topic. So first we have to ask, what does living in truth mean? Can't do anything day in and day out or any other way unless you know what it means. So the definition of living in truth has to be practical, because there are endless ways to define that. It's a big word, truth with a capital T. T-Ruth. T-Ruth. So for practical purposes, my suggestion is think of it this way. If you want to live in truth, you've got to raise your consciousness. You've got to have expanded consciousness. You have to have higher consciousness, right? Oh, I can't ask right because you can't say anything. Oh, you can nod. So living in truth means living in a higher consciousness. And of course, living in it means it's not a higher consciousness when you pay attention to it, or a higher consciousness when you have time for it. It's always. So you have to raise your consciousness, expand your consciousness permanently, be on a new level, be on a higher level. And assumedly, that's what you're trying to do. Whatever else you're trying to do, that's your intention for spiritual life. Certainly, whether it's your conscious idea or not, whether it's a stated goal or not, you should understand that spiritual life means trying to get to a higher, expanded, bigger, better consciousness. Not the everyday consciousness of worldly concern. And remember, whenever I say these terminologies, whenever I use the word truth, it's to me synonymous with all the other big words: God, reality, self-realization, cosmic consciousness, universality, oneness, and a few more biggies. They're all the exact same thing, because when you get to one, you've gotten to all the others. They are different approaches to the same thing, because different people are different. Whatever floats your boat doesn't necessarily float the next guy's boat. So some people are more interested in the aspect we call truth. Some people are more attracted to the aspect we call God. Some people are more intent on the aspect we call reality. But these are all emphases toward the same thing. And of course, all over the world, they have different words, different emphases, but it's talking about the exact same direction, the same goal, the same understanding. So never get over involved in arguing about the words. Never get too concerned about somebody else's terminology. Just translate it in your mind into your terminology. And then there's never any dispute. There's never any war of words. Anytime anybody's talking about something higher, support it. Don't argue about their choice of words. Let conventional people argue. You don't need to get involved. You take the spiritual way, which is understand and don't make a problem where there isn't one. So what we're talking about is getting to a higher consciousness. So that being defined and explained, we can move on to the other practical aspect. The other practical aspect is it's very difficult to identify how you live in truth. It's very difficult to identify what truth is until you know absolutely. So you have to start from where you are. You have to practice from where you are. If you'd like to live in truth, you have to work on it, deal with it from where you are, not from where you hope to be, which is where most people like to start, like to deal with it from, but that's fooling yourself, because if you're not there, then nothing real can happen, nothing can be accomplished. Right? They're all nodding their heads. So rather than take the hard road and try to figure out what it means or how to live in truth, my recommendation is take the easier way, which is identify how you're not living in truth. And how you're not living in truth is a misnomer, not really an accurate way to say it, because you're living in something. You're attending to something, you're focused on something, you're paying attention to something. So it's not that you're not living in truth, it's that you're living in something else. Now, before anybody's mind wants to make the argument that, but truth is all there is, so you're always living in truth and you can't not live in truth, of course that's true, but that doesn't help. We're talking about actual everyday life. We're talking about your actual thoughts, your actual feelings, your actual experience, your actual perception, your actual consciousness. Your consciousness in terms of your awareness and your perception, and your consciousness in terms of your mind's interpretations. And your consciousness in terms of the conditionings that limit your consciousness and give you partial or even false perceptions and interpretations. So all that has to be included. We don't leave the baby out with the bathwater. We don't leave the bathwater out from the baby. Everything is part of the game. So if the baby is higher consciousness and the bathwater is everything else, we have to address both. To be effective, we have to understand the methods that are likely to have good results, real results. And the real results in this are by identifying what you're living in rather than living in truth. We accept that, of course, all of that is in truth. Whatever you identify that isn't living in truth, it exists in truth. But your experience of it, of course, is not that it's truth. Your experience of it is whatever it is. It's my daily worries, it's my frustration with my job, it's my fighting with my spouse, it's my dissatisfaction with my bank account, it's my worries, it's my anxieties, it's my addiction to overeating, it's my constant complaining about the traffic. It's my psoriasis, it's my diabetes, it's my hemorrhoids. I don't have any of those, of course, but actually I do have diabetes, but only the normal kind. It needs no monitoring or medication or anything. Just means don't eat cake for breakfast, which I don't do anyway. Not even pancakes, no kind of cakes. So you can easily think, listening to this, you can easily right now go into your mind and not have probably too much difficulty figuring out, identifying what your focus is. Because if you're like most people, no matter how we characterize people, it's true equally of disciples and of conventional people. We tend to have a division. If we have a spiritual life or recognize the spiritual side of things, we tend to believe and perceive that there's a division between daily life, ordinary life, worldly life, material life, and spiritual life. There's kind of a higher life and a lower life. So, of course, it isn't true, but that's the perception, that's the actual experience. That's actually what people frequently and regularly ask about, complain about, are concerned with, and the concern is very right. Because especially if it isn't true, if it doesn't exist as an actual division, then it has to be dealt with. Then you have to get to some kind of accommodation of that misperception, some kind of working out how that gets dealt with. So that's the basis of the practical side of living in truth day to day, day in, day out, moment to moment. First, we have to recognize that one of the biggest reasons that most of us can't say I live in truth day in and day out is because we have this sense of division between our worldly life and our spiritual aspirations. And then it's a question, of course, obviously, of what's the proportion? How much are you, by your evaluation, because it's your life, only you can say for sure, how much are you caught in the worldly? How much of your minutes of awareness, minutes of attention during the day, there are a finite number of minutes in the day, and how many are going towards the worldly, towards what isn't directly truth, what's only a modification and amounts to a mistruth, a non-truth, an untruth. A modification of the truth is an untruth, a non-truth. If all is truth, then what isn't can only be a modification of the truth. But a modification is experienced as non-truth, or regarded as non-truth. So again, we don't have to argue about the terms. Don't let your mind argue about the terms listening to me. We're just understanding how this works. So it's easy probably for you to quickly identify, well, I spend more minutes of the day on my worries, on my complaints, on my dissatisfactions, on the things I'd like to change that frustrate me. I probably pay more consciousness minutes during the day to that account than I put into the spiritual account, the intangibles account. That's where I save. That's where I put my money. So whether it's 20% or 50% or 80% that goes in the worldly bank, the point is the proportion is very skewed. It's not 90-10. It's not 90% is spiritual and 10% is my worries and problems and fears, it's probably more than 50% if you're like most people. And if you're really like most people, it's probably 70 or 80 is in the non-truth category. And we would even say that 20 or 30% in the truth category would be a high number. And if you claimed that number, we probably wouldn't believe you, although it could be true. So think about it for a second. Living in truth, what are you living in? If you're living in non-truth, what is that non-truth all about? Some people live in their thoughts all day long, the ceaseless mind chatter that's common for the average person and even the average disciple. If most of your attention is bound up in that, then that's what you're living in. You're living in your mind chatter. And that is the most common place that people live in Western society, in their mind chatter. And they believe, because they've never been told different, and in fact have in many ways been told it's so, that that's the right place to live. Your mind is your essentially real self. That's the worldly materialist view. Your mind is your thoughts. Your mind is your essential self, not your being. They don't even recognize being. Your mind is your being, in essence, is their idea. And of course, it makes complete sense to hang out there, spend most of your time there, put most of your energy there, figure stuff out, figure out life, and do better, have more success, and control things. It's all about control. When you live in your mind, your motive is control, figuring out. And of course, if you're living in your mind and you're intent on controlling as much as you can, as directly as you can, of course, that has no bearing on living in truth. That's living in control obsession and control delusion. But it's where most people live. It's a highly populated area. Rents are constantly going up. New edifices are always going up and being offered. The other place people tend to live that has clearly an aspect or a characteristic of being far, far removed from anything you'd ever call truth is popular culture, Western popular culture. So how many people, you or someone you know, live in the notion that the purpose of your day and the right activity when you're not at work or doing what you're required to do to make a living, you're supposed to the rest of the time be entertained? How many people live in television, online, going out to entertaining activities, going out for dinner, social life? Of course, you have to have a social life. I'm not against social life. I'm not against any of it. Not TV, not online, not any of it. But I'm against living in it. I'm against thinking that it's the reality of your life. And how many people would you estimate are living exactly there? And how many minutes or hours of your day are spent living exactly there? So that's another example of how you live in something other than truth, how a person can live in something that would not accurately be referred to as living in truth. That's the life of distracting yourself from truth, actually. The reason people choose it, the reason people get conditioned into it, the reason society promotes it, is because it's a very, very effective, very successful way of avoiding all truth, the challenge of truth, the difficulty of truth, the pain of recognizing truth and adjusting yourself. And the society, of course, has a vested interest in you and any of its members not going too far with questioning things, self-examination, rocking the boat, questioning the status quo, because it's not conducive to, if enough people were to go that direction, it's not conducive to a totally orderly and controllable society, meaning the ones in charge can control the others without too much trouble. So how much of your life, how much of the minutes of your 24-hour day minus your sleep hours, we won't count that. So since most of you sleep 9 or 10 hours, how much of those 14 or 15 hours you're awake or your eyes are kind of open? At least you're standing up or sitting down, not prone. How many of those 14 or 15 hours are you living in the distraction mode? Find entertainment, watch TV, surf the net, hang out with friends with no real connection or interaction other than mutually helping each other to distract oneself, pretending to enjoy or desperately seeking to enjoy. And also, how many minutes of that 14 or 15 hours are you really attentive to and truly involved with the mind chatter and the thoughts and the subtle feelings that are always available, always going on, always flying right by and can be attended to. If they're not flying by, you can grab them out of the air, there's no problem. Now, I would venture to guess that if you're the typical conventional person and the typical disciple, it's more than 50-60% of those minutes of the 14 or 15 hours. Maybe it's 70, maybe it's 80, maybe it's 90. Of course, it's a little tiny bit more if you're a civilian, just a conventional minded person living the secular life, not spiritually seeking at all in any real sense, any conscious sense, but for spiritual seekers who have not gotten to the point where they can say, I know something about truth for real. The number is a big one. So it's valuable to ask yourself to spend some time after this talk considering where you're living. If you are not living in truth, where are you living? There's a third mode. I'm just giving you the major ones. There's as many modes as there are people, but there's, themes that are common, themes, trends that are popular, and 5 or 6 main ones, and almost everybody subscribes to one or two of those primarily as your main mode, the main place you live, the at-rest position. Another one is the person who's not so much monitoring their mind chatter, but it's also a mental position, the person who's kind of lost in daydreams. And everybody understands this because everybody does this to some degree, but there are people who actually live there primarily you kind of have an ongoing running fantasy life. You imagine yourself something other than who you are. You imagine a life different than the one you have, and you kind of yearn for it. You kind of covet it. You kind of believe it's your due. You spend a lot of time at that windowsill imagining what that would be like, and after a while it becomes so much of a habit that you kind of don't sense it anymore as imagining and fantasizing and daydreaming. You kind of live there. You kind of just see it as, well, it's very similar to the people who never turn off the television. It's just always on, and you're kind of always watching it, and it's always endless reruns. There's never a new show on. It's the same show you run all the time, but you never kind of tire. If you're in that mode, you kind of never tire of watching it again and thinking about it some more and embellishing the fantasy, polishing it up, and adding a few new details once in a while just to keep it interesting. But if you haven't or aren't one of those people or haven't been significantly in that mode in your life, you certainly know people who do that, who kind of live in their mental imaginary world. They kind of have a distracted quality. When you talk to them, they generally don't answer right away. They say, huh, first, like you just woke them up. So that's another common one. And a fourth common one is people who live in, let me think of how I could say it. People who live in the anticipation of their daily relating, who kind of are outgoing enough and are relational enough, but they've fallen into this pattern, this way of being, this way of doing their relating, where they're not really relating in the moment. They're more anticipating every moment of relating before it occurs. So when they walk in a room or they're about to go into the building to work, they're actually thinking about the people they're going to encounter, who's the first person that I usually see when I walk in, and they're kind of getting their first lines prepared. They're like actors preparing for the play, rehearsing. It's a rehearsal mode. So they're always rehearsing their relating. They're always kind of relating to you before you show up. And then by the time you show up, they kind of have the script down and they just say their lines. So it's a way of thinking you're really relating and being checked out instead, because you're doing the rehearsed relating rather than the real relating. So if somebody says something to you that isn't what you expect, you answer with what you expected them to say or ask. And you've heard this. I heard somebody do it yesterday here, where somebody walks in and the usual social formula is you say, well, hello, how are you? And somebody was here and somebody else walked in who did not say, hello, how are you, to the person that was here. Nevertheless, whatever they said, the person who was here obviously was expecting that, because their answer was, oh, I'm fine. The person said, oh, you're here. And the answer was, thank you, I'm fine. So obviously they were expecting to hear, hi, how are you? Because that's what they hear 95% of the time, 99% of the time. So that's a person who is socially rehearsed. That's a person who is living in relating. You can't say they're not living in relating, because that's their focus. Their focus is other people and how they relate to other. They're very concerned with how they themselves relate to other people. In other words, how they're going to be perceived. And they want good relations, they want pleasant relations. It's kind of a people-pleasing mode. It's kind of a let's keep everything nice mode. But there are people who live like this very, very intently. That's their main thing going on during the day. During those 14 or 15 hours when you're not in bed, that's the main thing going on. Who's coming in next? Who am I going to see next? What am I going to say to them? What are they going to think of me? How am I going to put my best foot forward? Yeah, I'm in a terrible, terrible mood, but I got to smile and not show my terrible mood and make sure they don't notice that I'd like to kill them. It's a kind of a social phoniness that becomes ingrained, that to them seems absolutely right and appropriate and good. In fact, why should I lay my funky mood on somebody else? It's right and good to pretend to be happy when I'm not, and to have a smile on my face and be friendly and as if it's the greatest day ever, and instead of the truth that it's a lousy day for me. So that's another one. People have their favorites. People have what fits with their tendencies, what absolutely is comfortable for them or seems right to them, seems like there's nothing wrong with it, because these modes are generally not questioned. In other words, you fall into them early in life, you adopt them, they become standard for you, you're very used to them, you're in that sense very comfortable with them, and you never stop and notice what you're doing, and you never stop and think, is this a good idea, or how did I become this way? When did this become my main way of relating to life, doing life? Unless, of course, spiritual life brings you to the requirement of having to examine it, identify it, question it, and decide if you really want to be this insane. So the alternative, of course, is higher consciousness. This, of course, everything I'm describing as main modes are main modes of lower consciousness, main modes of really not engaging with the cosmic reality, really not feeling yourself, sensing yourself, being aware of yourself as part of the greater fabric of life, the actuality of existence, but simply finding your little corner, whether it's socially sanctioned, societally approved or not, finding your little mode and sticking to it, which is the way to make sure that truth never is your way. That the challenge of living in truth is never going to present itself in your life. And that's the irony, because of course I'm speaking to spiritual seekers, and of course I'm speaking to very sincere people who want the truth. Yet, at least to some degree still, and certainly before, these modes were what you did, or still what you do to one degree or another. And you have to accept, you have to see the simple ironic fact of it, that you're seeking hard for truth, you're looking everywhere for God, you want it absolutely, but the mode you're in is a total barrier to any of it. Because if it's the mode of non-truth or the mode of untruth, obviously the way to be living in truth is to first get out of that. It's not that you have to find truth and then go live in it. It's that you have to identify what the hell your address is now and move. Because you can't move to Schenectady from Macon, Georgia, if you don't know your address in Macon, Georgia, and you're not sure that you're living in Macon, Georgia. First, you have to know where you live. Right? They're all nodding. So it's an elusive concept. It's too simple, so you wouldn't come up with it. I have to point it out to you. The mind doesn't come up with these simple things that the guru does, because the guru is the real simpleton. The guru lives in Simple Town. That's why people from Simple Town are called simpletons. You thought they were called simplites, but they're called simpletons. So you may not know where to tell the movers to go with your furniture if you're trying to move to Truthville, but you have to at least be able to tell them where you're living now so they can bring the truck, load your stuff, and you've got a better shot if your stuff's loaded and out of where you live now and you at least know the direction. You may not have the address where you're trying to set up house, but at least you know it isn't where I was living, and it's away from here. It's away. And if it's toward truth, if it's the necessity of higher consciousness, if you want truth, higher consciousness is necessary, then the direction is this way, which is, of course, going to make the moving truck people real happy. What are you saying? Truck doesn't go that way. Why do you think we are? So first you have to admit to yourself the truth, that you're living too many minutes in untruth, that you are in a form of betrayal of your sincere and real and right and good spiritual intention and spiritual desire and focus on truth and desire for God. You're going against it in your everyday life by being too caught in what ultimately, in the scheme of the eternal and the infinite, doesn't really matter. Matters while you're here a little bit, so you give it a little, you give it what it deserves, a little bit. But if you're living in it, obviously you're giving it way more than it deserves. And if you're even just hanging out in it too much, too long, too often, that's also simply not in your best interest, simply doesn't serve your desire for truth, doesn't forward your attempt to move Godward, doesn't support it, may actually be a negative force for it, but at the very least doesn't help. So this is not hard to understand, right? This isn't complicated, but it's hard to admit. It's hard for people to face up to the fact that, yeah, I have my habits, I have my indulgences, I have my tendencies, and you know what? It's true that they are, in that sense, anti-spiritual. They don't help. And in that sense, they're all indulgences. They're all luxuries that, if I really want to get there all the way in this lifetime, they're luxuries I cannot afford. Luxuries, who doesn't want luxuries? Luxuries are alluring and enjoyable and satisfy in certain ways, limited ways. So we get captured easily. We get ensnared readily, and we stay there for years, decades, and lifetimes. And then the dawn of the spiritual quest happens for you, and for you, of course, it's already happened, and not yesterday probably. And then the issue becomes how to get there so that I'm living there. Why do you want to get there? So you can live there. You don't want to get to God to attain God. You don't want to find truth so that you have found it. You want to do those things because you want to live there. Right? Think about it. You may not ever have thought about it that way, but it's obvious. It is about taking up residence. It is about where you want to hang out permanently, where you want to be. If you could be anywhere, if your choice could be up to you, that's where you would want to pitch your tent, build your temple, put your life, live your life, have your life be right there. If you want God, it means you want to live in God. If you want truth, If that's what appeals to you, it means you want to experience it all the time. What does living there mean? It's your environment. You experience it all the time. It's where you wake up and where you go to sleep. It's where you have your breakfast and where you wash your clothes. It's where you meet your friends, and it's where your friends meet you. It's what you're thinking about, it's what you're feeling, it's the weather inside and out. It's your milieu. It's your perception. It's what you're perceiving whenever you look. And when you're not looking, it's also what's vaguely perceptible. It's there. So have no complicated thought about it, needlessly complex idea about it. Your spiritual quest is about moving to a better place, living somewhere else than how you perceive where you live now. That's why we're talking about living in truth day to day, because this is your real motive. I want to live there. You don't want to rent. You don't want to do a timeshare. You want to live there. You want to be an owner living there, and mortgage free, hopefully. You want to have enough to pay for it and move in and settle down, and bingo bango, you're done. You're there forever. You are a permanent resident. You are king of the castle, queen of the roost, and all that kind of stuff. So if you haven't thought about it that way, hopefully it is obvious to you that that is your real intention. You are looking for a better neighborhood. You have woken up to the fact that the one you're in is low rent, high crime, and smells. And it ain't night blooming jasmine. And whenever you go for a walk, nobody's picking up their dog feces. So you know there's a better neighborhood. You know that it can be found. You know that you can, if you do the right things the right way, pay the right price, make the right phone calls, negotiate the right way, and do everything it takes, you might be able to move there. If you have enough spiritual coinage in the bank, you may be able to afford it. And of course, this is your actual set of motives. This is actually what you're trying to do. So the road to higher consciousness is simply moving to a better house, bigger and better, more full of light, not so dark, more on a higher plateau. It's up at the top of a hill, not at the bottom where all the sewage flows down on you. You're up beyond the clouds. The birds are singing sweeter. The sun is shining clearer. And even if they shoot at you from down there, the bullets won't reach. You want higher ground. Higher consciousness is higher ground. So higher consciousness has already happened to you, but it's the least higher consciousness. It's the most important one, the one that is the leap from conventional approach to discipleship or real spiritual desire. That is the most important shift in consciousness, because the most important raising of consciousness, because without that, none of the others are possible. None of the higher levels can be reached. Of course, you have to put your foot first on the first rung of the ladder. You can't just find yourself magically at the top of the ladder. So the most important shift, the most important change in consciousness has already happened. That's a done deal. If you want to dispute that, I'll prove you wrong. You've already proven it wrong. If you're listening, if you ever came to me for any reason, for any period of time, then you've proven it. Because the people who haven't put their foot on the first rung never show up. They don't get here. They don't speak this language. They don't have these interests. They don't engage on this level, and they don't want to hear about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear about it. It's not their thing, but it's your thing. So you're already in a higher consciousness than the one you were raised in, the one you were trained to be in, the one you started in, and it may be 2, 3, 4 rungs up. I don't know. I don't need to know. All I know is you're out of that minimal consciousness of being culture bound, just a robot of the society only, with no sense that there's something beyond, that the eternal and the infinite are absolutely beckoning. But of course, you aren't going to settle for the shift that's already happened. You want many levels up. You don't want to be on the elevator that stops only on the second floor. You want to get to the penthouse. You have appropriate ambition, appropriate greed. You don't want to settle for second or third floor when you know there's a 99th and 100th floor. You want to get right up to the top where the view is spectacular. Right? Nod your head. So, that's like saying if you're a sprinter, a runner, that's like saying, I want to be Olympic level. Higher consciousness is Olympic level. Remember, Olympic is Mount Olympus, comes from Mount Olympus, the home of the gods, the Greek gods. I want to be Olympic level, but I don't want to work hard. I don't want to train very much. I'll train a little bit. I'm not giving up my weekends, first of all. Don't even try to go there. I'm not giving up my weekends. And this whole thing of no alcohol, no drugs, get real. So that's off the table. That's non-negotiable. I'm not doing those things. I'm not meeting those requirements. I'm not accepting those restrictions. But I do want to be Olympic level. I don't want to do all the funky stuff. I want to do it easy, but most of all, I want to do it fast. I don't want it to take a long time. All right, today's Thursday. I think by Tuesday is reasonable. It's coming Tuesday. And it shouldn't cost me anything. Not just time and energy. It shouldn't cost me any money. It shouldn't cost me any inconvenience. And you know, it's legitimate for me to say that because I deserve it. I'm a good guy. I'm a good lady. I'm nice to people. I don't spit on animals. I don't pee on the shoes of blind people. I don't fart and blame someone else. At least not since age 15. Generally, I'm a good person. Generally, I have good intention. Generally, I try to be nice. So you got to admit I deserve it. It's not really fair to make me have to change everything and do a million things and live the hard way and put myself through all this duress and give up the things that I really enjoy just because I want to be Olympic level. Just give it to me. That's your attitude. not hesitant to say, but I hope you'll not freak out hearing it. That's your attitude toward higher consciousness. If higher consciousness is the Olympics, you just want to get there, and you don't really want to do what it takes if what it takes is not easy, not acceptable, not conducive with your prior wants, desires, preferences, and habits. So, that's your dilemma. If you want it for real, you have to be like the people who actually get to the Olympics. They only got there one way. They stopped indulging in the drugs and alcohol and late nights and carousing and not getting enough sleep. They actually trained. They trained 7 days a week. They didn't train 2-3 hours a day. They trained 14 hours a day. They got a professional coach to help them, Olympic level coach, proven coach. They did everything under the sun, everything that's required, everything anyone's ever done. And that's how they got the Olympics, to the Olympics. They didn't get there by accident. They didn't get there by native talent only. They didn't get there because they deserved it. They got there because they did everything that was necessary to have a shot at it. And then only those who actually did everything, plus had the native ability, plus had the good fortune, the luck, got there. Because for everyone that got there, there's 100 others who did everything right, put in all the work, but didn't make it. Tripped during the final trials, or overslept the day of the big race of the final trials, or one way or another got eliminated due to no fault of their own. They tried their best. They left no stone unturned. They spared no expense. They did everything right to the maximum. They held nothing back. They were totally committed. But only one of the 100 made it. Of the 9 people in the race, there's 900 others that did just as good as them but didn't get there. So that's your statistical situation, is just because you do everything, there's no guarantee. Just because you invest completely, fully, go all in, and just because you absolutely did everything perfect, still no guarantee. But don't do that, and there's a solid guarantee that you are not going to be Olympic level and you're not going to the Olympics. And if higher consciousness is the Olympics, and if to live in truth is what you want, to know God is what you want, to live in God is what you want, that's the Olympics. And you have to be willing to do what it takes. And you can't afford to play the hesitancy game, the doubting yet again game, the I'm not sure I can do that game, the resistance and self-sabotage game. You can't afford these luxuries at all. Because even if you do everything right, you may not win. You may not be chosen. But if you don't do it all, there's no chance. So you should assume, I've said this for a long time, similarly, the next thing I'm going to say, you should assume you're going to win. You should assume if 100 try out, 100 have made it, and you're in the finals, and only one will be the victor, you should assume that one's going to be you. Because anything other than assuming that, believing that, intending that, and what chance do you have? If you already have declared yourself the loser, do you think you're going to do everything it takes? You have to see yourself as victorious. You have to see yourself as beating the odds, absolutely beating the odds. And I've said this numerous times. I want every one of my people to be the winner. If only one of you can win, it should be every one of you. If there can only be one person who makes it, I want it to be you. Every single one of you. Which of course means you. So living in truth day to day is possible. It happens. I live in truth day to day, moment to moment. Come on, get real. If that's my situation, you think it can't happen for you? Look at me. There's nothing special. I don't have a special talent you don't have. I don't have some ability you don't have. I don't have a potential that you don't have in you the same. I'm not extraordinary except in the handsome department. I have just as many hang-ups, just as many foibles, just as many nonsense thoughts as you do, still. But I would never hesitate to admit I live in truth. And I've spoken numerous times in the last year or two about how that experience dawns. Truth starts to surround you. It's not that you found the address. It's that somehow you got there and you see the surround, you feel it all around. Everyone you talk to, it's there. Everyone you notice, it's there. Every place you look, it's there. You feel like it's closing in on you. It's not only your environment, it's not only surrounding you, it's to the left, to the right, behind, in front, every angle. But literally, you feel cornered. You feel like I can't turn anywhere where it isn't, and it's kind of smothering me. It's kind of coming closer and closer. That's a difficult and wonderful experiencing that always, in one form or another, happens. If you get there, you'll have some type of experience like that. That doesn't last very long. That's just the recognition that you've gotten to the neighborhood, that the movers found the address, even though you didn't have the address, and that you followed them in your Acura, and here you are. It has to be an Acura, because if the address is truth, it's got to be accurate. Dave Raj really liked that one. He bent over groaning. So I can't talk to you about the details, the methods, the actualities. Of course, it's all I ever talk about. But for this, I was almost going to say conversation, for this discourse, I can't talk to you about the actual topic directly, living in truth day to day, because you wouldn't hear what I say, what I would say about it. I can only talk to you the part you'll hear, the part you're ready to hear, the part you're willing to hear. So you're willing to hear how you're not living in truth because you always think there's something wrong with you, and that seems to fit with it. But the identifying what untruth, non-truth, anti-truth you're living in, that's acceptable to you at this point. Identifying the truth you're actually living in, even if it's only a moment here or there, that you'll resist more actively. You'll give all the credit to me. You'll say, well, when I'm with you, as if, I have the keys somehow and you don't. As if I have a special knack and you don't. As if I'm magic and you're cottage cheese. So I would love to talk to you about living in truth day to day, even better moment to moment. I would love to give you the details on how to do that, but there's no point. Because until you demonstrate the willingness to do what is required, why talk about how to make it to the Olympic trials and actually get to the Olympics? If you're talking only to people who are not going to do what it takes yet, You don't talk to them about how to get to the Olympics. You talk to them about why they have to get a more serious, better attitude and make a decision whether they really want to get there, which means you have no choice. You will have to accept doing what it takes. Your refusal doesn't work. If you're serious to get there, refusing to do what it takes is plain stupid. Simply a delay, a postponement at best. So you have to get clear about your real purpose, the really real purpose. If truth really is your purpose, if God really, really for real is your purpose, you can't afford all this playing around, all this indulgence of, well, I don't feel good today. Don't ask me to do that today. Call me Tuesday. That's not how you get to the Olympics. I can't ask you because you can't talk, but if I could ask you, I'd ask you, have any of you actually ever met an actual Olympic champion? I have. They are scary. They are very focused. They are very clear. They know what they're doing. And let me tell you something, and I'm not kidding. They have developed higher consciousness. You don't get to the Olympics unless you have cultivated a level of awareness that is akin to a serious Himalayan cave meditator who's been in retreat for 15 years, praying or meditating nonstop. They have that clarity. They have that direct contact with the source. In the most successful athletics, they talk about this all the time. The highest level athletic achievement, they talk about this the same way as they do in mystery schools. They're very aware that there's a transcendent aspect to it. So don't fool yourself that I want to be an Olympic champion. I want to at least get to the Olympics. Don't fool yourself that you can have that desire, that right goal, that highest intention. Don't fool yourself that you can have that and play these games. These games of not now, these games of what do you mean it won't be comfortable? What do you mean I have to go there? What do you mean I have to give up my Sunday? What do you mean I have to drive 20 miles? The things you're not willing to give up are so cheap, so niggling, so worthless, so absurd that you think they're a problem, that it really has to be understood like the Olympic example. It's like the guy who says, I want to be an Olympic swimmer, but I'm not going to go near water. I mean, you're talking absolute crap. So I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you very, very, very in depth about how to live in truth day to day. But for me to be able to do that, you have to be ready. You have to be willing. You have to have the ears to hear it. You have to understand that language. You have to cultivate higher consciousness and achieve it. That means you have to get to the Olympic level, and that means you have to decide whether you're kidding yourself or whether you're willing to do what it takes. If you're willing to do what it takes, I can coach anyone right to the gold medal. I am the coach of coaches. I can guarantee you Olympic entry, and I can pretty much assure you that if you're capable of Olympic victory, my coaching will do the job. If you have the talent, I've got the ability. But you got to want it more than you do right now. In other words, you have to show God, the universe, truth, grace, and me. Sounds like a band, doesn't it? Out of Seattle. That you're willing to do what it takes. And how do you do what it takes? You don't decide. The coach tells you. And of course, your first reaction is, I don't want to do that. Muhammad Ali's coach had him run 25 miles a day the moment he woke up, every day. 25 miles first thing. And he hated it. He hated running. He loved conditioning. He loved training. He loved preparing for battle. He loved victory. He knew he was a winner. But he really didn't like running. And in the very beginning, when he was young, because he won the heavyweight title when he was very young, more young than, I mean, usually it's young people who win. They have better stamina. But he was especially young for a heavyweight champion. And he wrote about it. His coach wrote about it. And he said, in the beginning, he really argued with the running part. Running 25 miles, first thing. He said, can't we do it in the middle of the day? Can't we make it 15? Does that have to be 25 miles? Can't you give me a break and we'll substitute something else that also has a conditioning effect? It's similar to the aerobic effect of running. And his coach sat him down when he was a young man, before he won the title, and said to him exactly what I've been saying to you. Kid, you say you want to be heavyweight champion of the world. You got the talent. I'm your coach. You know I've coached other heavyweight champions, people who made it. I have that track record. You trust me. You know I know what I'm doing. You know you're not going to find a better coach, and I believe in you, but your attitude isn't right yet. You're not willing to do what you don't like means you don't have a shot. So either you're going to get right with your attitude, either you're going to say, I don't have to like it to do it, but I have to do it. Either you're going to say, I'm going to do it whether I like it or not, and as long as I'm going to do it and have to do it, I'm going to do my best to like it, and at the very least not hate it or resent it, because that just drags me down, makes it more difficult. I'm going to cheerfully, optimistically do it, because it has to be done if I want that heavyweight championship, if I want that title, if I want that trophy. So kid, decide really, for real, once and for all, do you want it or not? And if you do, if you really truly want it, if that's crystal clear finally, I know you think you want it, I know you've been wanting it your whole life, but get crystal clear. And if the answer is yes, then you can't have any other goal, you can't have any other focus. You have to be one way only, single-minded, one-pointed. And you have to do everything I tell you. And you can't fight with me, you can't resist me, and you can't be in a struggle in yourself about it, because that will just ensure that you never win. And if that's what you're going to do, why bother? Then don't run. Then just enjoy yourself. Do what you like. But if you want to win, if you want that title, if you want to be world champion, if you want to reach the goal, make up your mind. So, living in truth, I'm going to repeat it, living in truth day to day absolutely can happen for you. You can get there. It's many, it's not a put down, it's not a criticism, it's the truth, it's the facts of it. It's many levels away from where you are right now. But it was also many levels, probably even more than your tally, away from me back when. And yet here I am. So you have to be told that living in truth is not some fantasy, nice idea, but who knows if it's real. It's absolutely real. Absolutely living in truth, day to day, moment to moment, is attainable, worth it, worth everything you have to do, and represents a level of consciousness that makes everything acceptable, makes every price you ever paid a happy price, even if it was everything. And no one has ever found a way to live in truth and not been 1000% glad. Nobody's ever, it's never happened for anybody who, once they attained it, had a regret, a moment of remorse, a single thing that they felt they lost because of it. It is 100% gain only. It is all world championships and beyond. But you've really got to make up your mind. And if you decide it's too much and you don't really want it, and you're not willing to, because you're not willing to do what it takes, that's perfectly valid. You're not required to do it. You can settle for less. I'm one of the few gurus there's ever been that's happy to settle for less. Most gurus say, fuck you if you don't want to go all the way. Then get out of my sight. If you want to advance 1 inch, I'm happy for you, and I'll do everything I can to help you do that. You don't need to get to the highest mountain. You can just go next door. If that's your challenge and that's what you want, fine with me. But if you want the highest, you're going to have to stop all the jockeying and start working on it for real. It's your decision. I don't decide it for you. But if you decide for it, I'm absolutely thrilled to be in your corner. Hey, Angelo. That's what floats my boat. Being in your corner, being in the corner of those who really want it and are willing to do what it takes. So very soon I want to talk to you about how to be living in truth day to day. I'd have liked to have that conversation, that discourse tonight, but I can only give you what you're ready for, what you're actually going to hear. So it's that you can live in truth. more than day to day, second to second, half second to half second. But only if you don't even have the slightest no rise up in you toward what it takes. Only if you are truly, truly committed. But none of my people don't have that capability. You all do. I'm just waiting for you to make up your mind more for real. And higher consciousness becomes possible for only one type of person, the one who has made up their mind once and for all. The vacillators, even a little vacillation and higher consciousness cannot descend upon you. You don't reach higher consciousness. You do everything under the sun to reach it, and then if you are total, it descends. You will never get any level or form of higher consciousness that you will not experience as it descended upon you. That will always be the experience. That's the only way it works. But it isn't free. It doesn't descend accidentally. You have to do your side. You'll never do anything more worth it in your life. Nobody can tell you how good it is. You're going to have to find out for yourself. Because it's so good, it can't be expressed. You just have to get it. Why not you? Why not you? Somebody has to be world champion. Why not you? I want every one of you to be the champion of the world. Every one of you to be the single winner. There'll only be one winner. I want to be every one of you. If that's not your attitude, you won't get there. Now, we're past time, but I want to add one more thing. Because if I leave it out, I haven't told you the full nature of it. It was never my intention to win. It was never my attitude to be the champion. It was never my thought that I should run the race and I should be victorious. It's just not how I thought about it. It's just not how my mind works. But I did want it totally. Everything in me wanted reality. I was not willing to settle for less than reality itself. I really had that single-pointedness. As far as I was concerned, what is this life worth if I don't get to reality? So I just want you to understand that I've talked about this in a certain form for you to be able to understand it, for it to be intelligible and comprehensible. But it doesn't have to be in exactly that form. It has to amount to the same thing. Because for me, if I listened to the form I just talked in, I would feel like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with what happened for me. But it does. It's exactly what happened for me because I wanted it that much. I wanted it 100%. And I was willing to do anything and everything, whatever it takes. If it meant I had to cut off my arm, I would have cut it off. I can only tell you that I know I would have. It didn't come up. But had it, you'd be talking to me like this. So don't get stuck on the way we talk about it as that's the way it has to be, because I'm speaking bluntly and saying this is required, this is the only way it works. But that doesn't mean that the form of it has to be exactly one way. Of course it doesn't mean that. So don't get stuck with wrong understanding. Don't be simple-minded about it. And lastly, the only reason I made it, the only reason I can say to you now that absolutely I live in truth, is because more than wanting reality, I was so in love with my master that I didn't care if I didn't make it. I wanted it with all my heart. I intended to make it. Don't hear it as a contradiction. It's not. I wanted it, absolutely. I wasn't willing to settle for not getting it or anything less. Nevertheless, at the same time, I was so in love and so thrilled and so totally absorbed in my master that as far as I was concerned, I'd already attained my master. That's the attainment. I don't need to get to reality. I don't need anything else. I already have more than I ever imagined, more than I would ever dared think I could have. It's not a contradiction. You have to want it with your whole heart and soul. Whether it's truth, whether it's God, for me it was reality. But if you have a master, your love for the master has to be cultivated all the way. Or your trust, or your devotion. Whatever it is that's the flavor for you, that's the best rocket fuel. Every level of higher consciousness, any level of higher consciousness that I've, through grace, received, that's descended on me, if I had to give one explanation, it's because I loved Osho that much. So you are disciples. You have the benefit of that possibility. You have both wings available. One wing is you're decisive and you know you want it and you stop playing games and you go for it. And the other wing is your love for the Guru. And with both wings, your chances of flying higher improve vastly. That's the benefit of discipleship. You get two wings instead of one. It's like the weekend special at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Extra wings. Very soon, I hope to be talking to you about the mechanics and direct methods of immediately living in truth all the time, day to day. Very soon. Don't keep me waiting. The sooner the better.